The courtroom had never seen anything like it. Everyone from the judge to the bailiff looked at the tiny girl walking hesitantly across the floor, her small fingers gripping her mother's hand, the other arm clinging tightly to a faded pink stuffed bunny. Lila was only 3 years old, and she was about to become the youngest witness the county courthouse had ever seen. It wasn't supposed to be this way. The courtroom was meant for lawyers, defendants, and officers people used to the formality of justice. But now, everyone watched a toddler shuffle into the center of it all, silent and wide-eyed, her steps unsure. Her mother, Emily, looked exhausted. The months leading up to this day had taken a toll. Sleepless nights, hospital visits, counseling, and now the final step, the court hearing. Today, she would testify against her ex-boyfriend, the man accused of abusing her. She had kept quiet for too long, and now it was time to be heard. What she hadn't expected, though, was that her daughter, her quiet, observant little girl, might end up speaking louder than anyone else in the room. To help ease the tension in such cases, the courthouse had recently introduced a new program, Therapy Animals for Child Witnesses. And today, they'd brought in Ranger, a retired German Shepherd police dog, calm, loyal, and trained to comfort. Ranger had once been a K-9 unit in the field, but now his job was simpler, helping victims of trauma feel safe. He'd been through dozens of courtroom visits in the past few months. Children usually ignored him or patted his head nervously. But today was different. Lila stopped the moment she saw him. Her hand slipped from her mother's grasp. Everyone in the room watched, uncertain of what would happen next. She stepped forward, eyes wide, and stared at the dog. Ranger, resting quietly by his handler's side, lifted his head and stared back. Something passed between them, something that no one could fully explain. Then came the words that stopped the world. "That one," she said, her little voice suddenly echoing through the silent room. She pointed directly at Ranger. "That one was there." The judge blinked. Lila's mother froze. Even Ranger's handler, Officer Daniels, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The judge leaned forward. "Sweetheart, can you say that again?" Lila nodded. "He was there, the night the bad man hurt Mommy." Everyone in the courtroom stared. Even the lawyers exchanged bewildered glances. Ranger? The police dog? What was she talking about? "Officer." Daniels tilted his head. "Your Honor, this dog was brought in today just for emotional support. He's never met this child before. We rotate animals weekly. He wasn't selected based on any past contact." But Lila wouldn't look away from Ranger. He barked, loud, at the door. "I was in the closet." Her mother covered her mouth in shock. Tears welled in her eyes. "Lila," she whispered, "you remember?" Lila nodded again. The judge immediately called for a recess. The courtroom needed to regroup. The defense attorneys scribbled furious notes. The prosecutor stared in disbelief. What was supposed to be a fairly routine hearing had suddenly exploded into something far more serious. As officers escorted Lila and her mother to a private room, Officer Daniels knelt beside Ranger and looked him in the eyes. "Were you really there, boy?" he murmured. Ranger thumped his tail and licked Daniels' hand. If what Lila said was true, the case they thought they'd fully documented months ago had a piece missing, one that could change everything. A child they hadn't known was at the scene. A locked closet they never opened. A barking dog that tried to warn them. And now, months later, that same dog was here, again recognized, instantly, by a child too young to forget. The courtroom was no longer just a place for facts. It had become the stage for a story no one expected, and it had just begun. The courthouse hallways buzzed with whispers. Reporters hadn't been allowed in the courtroom, but word had already begun to spread. A toddler had identified a police dog from a months-old domestic violence case, and claimed he was there the night it happened. Inside the judge's chambers, the mood was equally tense. Judge Monroe flipped through the original case files. Brow furrowed. There's no mention of a child being present. No child listed in the reports. And this officer, Daniels, you were on scene? Officer Daniels, still trying to process what had just occurred, nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Ranger and I responded to the call at 243 Brookside Apartments. Domestic disturbance. Suspect was combative, but we managed to detain him. Woman was injured, but I swear there was no sign of a child. The judge leaned back, and yet she claims she was there, hiding in a closet. Daniels looked down at Ranger, who sat quietly at his feet, as if sensing the seriousness of the moment. Ranger did behave oddly that night. He barked at a closet door repeatedly. We thought it was nothing. Maybe the suspect had drugs stashed, or a pet. We never forced it open. The woman wasn't speaking much. And everything happened fast. Is it possible, the judge said slowly, that the child really was inside? And the dog knew? Daniels swallowed hard. Now, I believe it's very possible. In another room, Emily held Lila on her lap, stunned and emotional. Her daughter had barely spoken in months. Since that night, she'd withdrawn completely, but now her voice was returning, and her memory vivid and sharp. You were really in the closet? Emily whispered, brushing Lila's hair back. Lila nodded solemnly. You were crying. He was yelling. Then the dog came. He barked at the door. I stayed quiet. Emily's eyes welled with tears. Sweetheart, why didn't you tell Mommy before? I was scared. I didn't want him to come back. Back in the courtroom, the judge reconvened and requested an emergency review of all body cam footage from the responding officers that night. If there was any footage of Ranger barking at a closet door, or sounds they hadn't noticed before, it might confirm what Lila said. As the files were retrieved, Daniel sat quietly beside Ranger. You tried to tell us, didn't you? He whispered. Ranger licked his fingers and wagged his tail slightly. Emily and Lila were brought back in as the footage was prepared for display. Layla clung to her mother at first, but when she saw Ranger again, she walked over and sat next to him. The dog didn't move, just leaned his body against her. The courtroom watched, silent. The footage began to play. It was dark, chaotic. Officers entered the apartment, shouting commands. A woman's screams echoed faintly. The suspect resisted, but was eventually restrained. Then came the moment. Ranger broke away from Daniels and stood in front of a closed closet door, barking aggressively. Daniels pulled at his leash. Ranger resisted, pawing at the door. Leave it, boy. Daniels sat on the recording. But behind the barking, a faint sound was now clearly audible, barely audible, but unmistakable. A child's whimper. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Officers exchanged looks. Emily sobbed quietly. Daniels covered his mouth with his hand. The judge paused the footage. Rewind. Play that again. They did. The same sequence. Barking, whimpering, a child. She'd been there all along. Judge Monroe turned to the prosecutor. You're reopening this case immediately. There are grounds for endangering a minor and possible obstruction. The defense lawyer stood, flustered. Your Honor, this wasn't part of discovery. Because it was missed, the judge snapped. By everyone except the dog and the girl. Lila stood now, gently patting Ranger's head. He helped me, she said softly. He didn't forget me. No one in the courtroom would forget her either. Justice had been delayed, but not denied. Detective Linda Graves sat hunched over the body cam footage again, pausing it at the moment Ranger barked at the closet. She adjusted the volume and put on her headphones. The faint whimper from the closet was there, clear now that they were listening for it. Her gut tightened. She rewound it again and again. Rangers barking, the officer's urgent commands, the suspect yelling, and just beneath it, the sound of a child, afraid and alone. How the hell did we miss this? She muttered. The question hung in the air like a judgment. Ranger had known. He had tried to alert them. But in the chaos of the arrest, no one had listened. And Lila, barely 3 years old, had been locked in a dark closet, silent and terrified, holding her stuffed bunny, thinking no one was coming. Until Ranger came. Back at the precinct, Officer Daniels sat at his desk, head in his hands. He was reliving that night over and over in his mind. "We were in such a rush," he told his partner, "trying to get the guy under control. I remember Ranger pulling me toward that door. I thought maybe the guy had stashed something. Drugs. Evidence. But then it all moved so fast. We restrained him. The paramedics were coming in. I didn't push harder. I should have," his partner sighed. "We all missed it." "Yeah, but he didn't," Daniel said, glancing down at Ranger, who was lying quietly at his feet, still alert despite his age. He knew. Daniels pulled up Ranger's deployment history. Sure enough, that domestic call had been one of their final joint assignments before the dog was retired. Daniels remembered bringing him back to the station that night, frustrated and unsettled. "You were acting weird, buddy," he murmured. "And I didn't even ask why." Now he knew why. The next morning, Detective Graves returned to the courtroom with her report. Judge Monroe reviewed it carefully. "You're confirming that there is clear audio of a child in the closet?" "Yes, Your Honor, and I've also confirmed that no secondary sweep of the premises was conducted that night. The officers reported no signs of a minor because they never checked beyond the main living space. They failed to open that closet door." The judge nodded grimly. "This changes everything." Meanwhile, Lila was slowly opening up. In the safe room next to the courtroom, she played with a coloring book while Ranger lay beside her. Every time he moved, her eyes lit up. Her mother, Emily, watched with tears in her eyes. "She hasn't bonded with anyone like this in months," she whispered to the court-appointed therapist. "She's been so quiet, withdrawn. But with him, she talks. She remembers. She feels safe." The therapist nodded. "It's remarkable. This dog isn't just helping her cope, he's helping her heal." As the court session resumed, the judge called Daniels to the stand. "Officer Daniels," Judge Monroe said, "you were Ranger's handler that night. Tell the court what you remember." Daniels spoke carefully, remorse in every word. "We arrived to find the suspect screaming. Miss Harper Emily was visibly injured. While I restrained the suspect, Ranger began barking at the closet. He wouldn't leave it. I thought it was just nerves. I didn't press the issue." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Why not?" "Because I didn't think there was a child involved," Daniels admitted. "There was no mention of one when the 911 call came in, and the closet was locked. We were trained to prioritize safety and detaining the suspect. I made the wrong call." "Do you believe Ranger knew the child was in there?" Daniels glanced at Lila, then at Ranger. "Without a doubt." The courtroom sat in still silence. In one corner, little Lila curled up beside the very dog who hadn't forgotten her. A dog who had remembered what trained professionals had missed. And now, the world was finally listening. The courtroom was quiet when Lila entered again, this time holding Ranger's leash loosely in her tiny hand. It was a powerful image, one that stopped every whisper, stilled every pen, and froze every breath. Emily walked beside her, but Lila's gaze remained on Ranger. It wasn't just comfort anymore, it was trust. He was her protector, her anchor. In a sea of strangers, her stuffed bunny was now tucked in her backpack. She didn't need it when Ranger was near. The judge gave a gentle nod to the child advocate, who crouched beside Lila and asked softly, "Would you like to talk to us again, sweetheart?" Layla didn't hesitate this time. She looked up at the judge. Yes. The room leaned in, as though holding its collective breath. "What do you remember about that night?" Lila's voice was quiet but steady. "He was hurting Mommy. He yelled a lot. I was scared. Mommy told me to hide. I went in the closet and held my bunny and didn't move." The advocate nodded. "And then what?" "I heard a door crash. Then barking, loud barking. The bad man yelled again. Then everything got quiet." "Do you remember the dog that was barking?" Lila turned and smiled down at Ranger. "It was him." The courtroom stirred. Some wiped their eyes. Others simply stared at the girl in disbelief. She was barely 3 years old, yet the trauma hadn't blurred her memory. It had etched it deeper. The judge looked toward the prosecutor. "You have the floor." The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, we intend to submit a motion to reopen the criminal investigation with new charges. Based on the child's testimony and verified audio evidence, we believe this child was a direct witness and victim." The defense attorney stood immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. This child's testimony is emotional but unreliable. She's 3 years old, and she's identifying a dog months later. This could be projection or suggestion." But Judge Monroe wasn't moved. "The dog is not testifying. The child is. And so far, her recollection is being supported by real-time evidence." He turned to the jury. "You will be instructed to consider the testimony in light of its corroboration, not the child's age." Ranger, seemingly aware of the attention, rested his head on Lila's knee. She gently stroked his ears. Later in the hallway, Emily broke down. "I thought I was protecting her by not saying she was there," she told a reporter. "I was afraid they'd take her away. I didn't want to lose her too." "But she remembered," the reporter said softly. Emily nodded. "She remembered everything. And that dog. He remembered her." As the day's session ended, Judge Monroe made a rare public comment. "In my years on the bench, I've seen plenty of testimony, but I've never seen something so unexpected and so moving as what we witnessed today. A child who couldn't speak found her voice through the very creature meant to comfort her. This is more than coincidence. It's truth finding a way." News of the case began to spread beyond county lines. Reporters dubbed it the K-9 testimony. Ranger's photo appeared beside Lila's story in local newspapers. Experts were called to weigh in. Could a dog really remember someone after months? The answer, surprisingly, was yes. Dogs trained in law enforcement had strong emotional memory, especially tied to traumatic events. Ranger hadn't just comforted Lila. He had remembered her scent, her fear, the moment he barked at a door everyone ignored. And now he was barking again. Not through sound, but through loyalty. Lila, once silent, was speaking with clarity. Each word was a step toward justice. And the world had started to listen. Detective Linda Graves stood in front of the familiar apartment door at 243 Brookside. It had been months since the initial report. The tenant, Emily's ex-boyfriend, was no longer living there. The place had been cleaned out, repainted, released. But Graves wasn't interested in the furniture or tenants. She was focused on the closet. It was in the hallway, adjacent to the living room, just large enough to fit a few coats. Maybe a child sitting cross-legged with a stuffed toy. She opened the door and stepped inside. She shut it behind her. Pitch dark. Graves crouched down and looked at the crack beneath the door. Just enough light filtered through to make out vague shapes. Just enough space for a child to watch from. The shadows. She didn't need imagination to feel the fear. It was tight, stuffy, airless. She emerged moments later, her face pale. Back at the station, she compiled her findings. The original report, made no mention of a closet search. There had been no mention of a minor in the dispatch. No follow-up interviews beyond the initial arrest. The entire case had been closed in a matter of days. Until now. The reopened footage and Lila's statement had made one thing abundantly clear. The child's presence had been missed, and Ranger the police dog had tried to alert the officers. Judge, having reviewed Graves's report, reconvened court immediately. The courtroom was more crowded. Now media had picked up the story, and the public wanted answers. We've located critical gaps in the original investigation, Graves testified. Ranger's behavior that night was not coincidental. Body cam footage and enhanced audio confirmed the presence of a child behind the closet door. Gasps rippled through the room. The prosecutor stepped forward. So, to be clear, Detective, the child's testimony is supported by physical evidence, audio, and your own on-site reenactment? Yes, Graves said. Her memory is consistent. Her fear was real, and the dog recognized her after months. That's not chance. That's memory. Judge Monroe leaned forward. Was the original suspect ever questioned again after the initial arrest? No, Your Honor, Graves said. He was released on bond and never charged further due to insufficient evidence and lack of corroborating witnesses. The judge's voice darkened. Until now. That afternoon, officers served a warrant for rearrest. The suspect, Marcus Bell, was taken into custody without incident. This time, the charges were expanded: felony child endangerment, obstruction of justice, and aggravated assault. Emily broke down in the hallway when she heard. They're finally listening, she whispered. Lila, who sat playing with crayons and Ranger, looked up. Mommy okay now? Emily pulled her close. Yes, baby. Because of you. Because you remembered. Later that evening, Ranger was formally recognized in a small ceremony held in the courthouse lobby. Officer Daniels stood beside him as judge. Monroe presented a plaque. For instincts that never faltered, he said. For alerting us, even when we failed to understand. This commendation is awarded to Ranger, the retired K-9 who helped bring justice. Cameras clicked. Reporters flooded the scene, but Ranger didn't seem to care about medals or attention. He lay calmly at Lila's feet, watching her draw pictures of herself and him stick figures with big smiles. One reporter leaned down beside Daniels. Do you think the dog knew what he was doing? Really? Daniels smiled faintly. I think he remembered pain, fear, a child scent. He knew she mattered. That was enough. That night, as the courthouse emptied and the press faded, one truth remained. A child had been locked away, overlooked by the very system meant to protect her. And yet it was a dog silent, loyal, and ignored who remembered. Justice hadn't. Just knocked. It had barked. By now. The courtroom had become more than a place of law. It had become a symbol of unexpected justice. News vans lined the street outside. National outlets began reporting the story of a child whose first words in court identified a police dog and helped expose a critical error in a criminal case. Inside, however, the focus was still on one thing: the truth. Ranger lay on a soft blanket next to Lila as experts were brought in to testify. One of them, Dr. Helen Arlo, was an animal behaviorist who had studied law enforcement K-9 units for over a decade. She stepped up to the witness stand, nodding respectfully to the judge. Dr. Arlo, the prosecutor began, can you help the court understand whether a dog like Ranger could retain memory of a specific person or event after several months? Yes, she answered. Dogs, particularly those trained for law enforcement, have incredibly strong emotional memories. They associate scents, sounds, and environments with their experiences, especially traumatic or intense ones. Ranger's reaction to Lila was not instinctual comfort. It was recognition. Are you saying the dog remembered her? saying he never forgot her, Dr. Allah said, looking toward Ranger. He responded immediately upon seeing her. That type of reaction, weeks or even months after an event, is consistent with a stored memory of distress. Ranger connected that child to a traumatic moment. The defense attorney stood. But dogs aren't humans. Isn't it possible this is all coincidence? That the dog reacted because the child was nervous or crying? No, Dr. Arlo said calmly. Ranger didn't just comfort her. He fixated on her. He sat beside her. He refused to leave her. That's behavioral evidence of recognition, not random empathy. The courtroom absorbed her words with awe. Ranger lay still, but lifted his head slightly, as if acknowledging he'd been mentioned. Later that day, the prosecutor called Emily back to the stand. Ms. Harper, has your daughter spoken about the incident in any detail outside of court? Emily nodded, voice trembling. Every day since she saw Ranger again. It's like he unlocked her memories. She talks about the closet, about the yelling, about hiding. But more than that, she talks about him. She says he made her feel safe. Was she speaking about that night, before Ranger appeared in court? Emily wiped her eyes. Not once. Outside the courtroom, therapists who'd been working with Lila shared similar reports. She's building emotional confidence, one said. The dog gave her a foundation. Before, she was silent, afraid of saying the wrong thing. But with Ranger, she feels protected, empowered. And it showed. Lila had stopped hiding behind her mother. She now entered the courtroom with her chin up, and her hand loosely wrapped around Ranger's leash. The shy girl who barely whispered was now forming full sentences, helping build a case against the man who hurt her family. Ranger, in his quiet way, stayed by her side. At the end of the day's session, Judge Monroe addressed the room. This case will likely influence not only how child witnesses are handled, but how we regard the role of Canine South in trauma recovery and investigations. Today, we saw evidence that instinct and memory can sometimes succeed where formal procedure fails. He glanced toward Ranger and Lila. That dog didn't just support a witness. He revealed one. Outside the courtroom, the public was captivated. Dog Who Knew became the headline on dozens of articles and news shows. Interviews aired, discussions were held, and mental health professionals began advocating for more emotional support animals in the justice system. But inside the courthouse, amid all the attention and flashing cameras, the focus remained unchanged. One little girl, one silent hero, and a bond that helped recover a truth nearly forgotten. And Ranger, calm, loyal, watchful, had never needed to say a word. The courtroom was quiet again, not out of formality, but out of reverence. Everyone knew what was coming. The next witness wasn't an expert or an officer. It was the mother. Emily Harper. She looked small on the witness stand, fragile. But her eyes burned with a fierce, quiet determination that hadn't been there before. The prosecutor approached slowly, gently. Miss Harper, thank you for being here. We know this is difficult. Emily gave a faint nod. The prosecutor continued. Can you tell the court why you didn't inform responding officers that your daughter was present the night of the incident? Emily swallowed hard, her fingers trembling as she clutched the edge of the chair. Because I was terrified, she said. Not just of him, but of the system. I thought if they knew Lila was there, they'd take her from me, that I'd be charged with neglect, that I'd lose her. She paused, taking a shaky breath. I didn't think anyone would believe me. I didn't even believe myself at the time. What changed? Emily's voice cracked. She did. That little girl sitting with that dog, she's stronger than I ever was. She remembered what I tried to forget. She pointed to Ranger and said, that one, like she was calling the whole world out for ignoring her. The prosecutor gave her a moment. then gently asked, "Did Ranger's presence affect your daughter in any way prior to this case?" Emily shook her head. "No, we'd never seen him again. Until that day in court. I didn't even realize he was the same dog from that night. And when she saw him?" Emily smiled through her tears. She lit up. It was like she found her voice again, and then she found her courage. The courtroom listened silently, even the defense attorney. No longer scribbling notes. No one dared interrupt. Judge Monroe turned to Emily. "Do you regret staying silent?" "Yes," she whispered. "Every day. But I'd do anything to protect my child. And I thought silence was protection. I was wrong." After her testimony, Emily stepped down and returned to Lila. She scooped her daughter into her arms, holding her like she hadn't in months, not out of fear, but out of pride. Lila giggled quietly, then turned to Ranger and hugged him too. The courtroom watched. Touched beyond words, the prosecution rested their case. The defense offered no further witnesses. What could they say? Every argument had been undone by a dog, a child, and a mother's raw truth. Back in the judge's chambers, legal staff reviewed the possible maximum charges: aggravated assault, child endangerment, obstruction of justice, and violation of a protective order. Detective Graves stood with her file closed. "We had everything we needed months ago," she said bitterly. "But we didn't listen to the signs, the barking, the woman's silence, the missing closet." Daniels, standing beside Ranger, nodded slowly. "He tried to tell us." Graves looked at the dog. "He did." That night, as the sun set on the courthouse steps, a group gathered for a quiet vigil. Survivors of domestic abuse stood in a circle, candles in hand. Some held photos. Others stood quietly, eyes closed. Emily and Lila joined them. Lila held a candle too, but she kept her other hand on Ranger's back. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. Across the street, someone hung a banner from a balcony. It read, "Some heroes wear badges, others wear fur." The case was no longer just about what had happened in a single apartment on a single night. It was about what happens when silence becomes truth, and when truth finally finds the courage to speak, even if it comes from the smallest voice in the room. Even if it comes with a bark. The courtroom was packed on the final day. Reporters, advocates, law students, and ordinary people who had followed the story from afar now filled every seat. Some stood in the back. Others waited outside, watching updates through courtroom sketches and live blogs. Judge Monroe entered. In silence. The jury had reached its decision. Lila sat beside her mother, Ranger lying protectively across her feet. She wore the same blue dress from her first court appearance. Emily said it made her look brave. The bailiff read the charges one by one. The room held its breath. Guilty, 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 3 times. No hesitation. The man who had haunted their lives for months sat still, face pale, as the verdicts were read. He looked toward Emily, perhaps expecting remorse or pity. He got none. Instead, she held Lila closer, and Lila, now unafraid, turned her face toward the man and whispered just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I remember." He blinked, then looked away. The judge cleared his throat. "This court recognizes not only the bravery of a witness too young to understand the weight of her testimony, but also the role of an unassuming service animal whose instinct and loyalty changed the course of justice." He looked down at Ranger. "I recommend this case be submitted to the Department of Justice for review and to law enforcement across the country as a model for trauma-informed investigation practices." The courtroom applauded not out of disrespect, but out of admiration. When it was over, Emily stood with Lila outside the courthouse, microphones pointing in every direction. But this time, Emily didn't flinch. She took a breath. My daughter was almost invisible in this system. But she was seen by a dog. Ranger didn't just comfort her. He reminded her that she mattered. She looked down, and Lila squeezed Ranger's paw. She remembered what adults wanted to forget. And she was braver than all of us. Ranger became a national icon overnight. Media dubbed him the Witness Whisperer. Children began writing letters to him. One letter from a little girl in Ohio read, "I was scared to tell my teacher, but then I saw you on the news. Now I'm not scared anymore." Within a month, several police departments began piloting emotional support K-9 programs in courtrooms and shelters. The district even approved a bill named after Ranger to mandate trauma response K-9 South in domestic violence cases involving minors. Emily and Lila moved to a new home, away from the memories, but they didn't leave Ranger behind. Officer Daniels, seeing the bond that could never be broken, submitted formal paperwork to have Ranger retired early with full honors to live with Lila. At the ceremony, Daniels knelt beside Ranger. "You did more than any of us. You listened when we didn't, and you brought her back to us." Ranger licked his hand in reply. Lila stepped forward with a medal in her tiny hand. "For being my hero," she said, hanging it gently around his neck. The room erupted in applause, and Daniels smiled through tears. "I think you outrank me now, buddy." Years later, long after courtrooms and headlines had faded, Ranger remained by Lila's side. He was there for her first day of school, her nightmares, her birthdays. And one evening, sitting on the porch as the sun dipped behind the trees, Lila whispered into Ranger's ear, "You helped me speak when no one listened. I'll never forget." Dog's ears twitched, and his eyes sparkled with quiet understanding. He hadn't needed words, but he had helped the world hear hers.